Hello and welcome. It's now established that natural disasters are occurring around the world and in India, both with greater ferocity as well as greater frequency than ever before. And over the next few years, India can expect an increased number of floods, earthquakes, cyclones, and the shattering loss for all of us of thousands of lives that these ferocious natural disasters bring in their wake. But as they say, earthquakes don't kill. Badly constructed buildings kill. It's man's intervention that is so critical here. Now, global studies have shown that, in fact, a great deal can be done to save lives before, during, and after a natural calamity. Can we learn from the history of disasters? Can we in India take steps to save lives? Well, the answer is yes. While India can indeed expect with certainty that there are going to be a large number of natural disasters ahead over the next 10 years, but yes, India can save hundreds of thousands of lives if we take some simple, not expensive, simple steps. But we have to take these steps right now. That's why I like this report published by the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Here it is. It's called India's Disaster Report number 2. The first one came out in 2000. Now, India has got a long way to go in streamlining the way we handle disasters. It is a question of life and death for millions of people. So we better read this report and get our implementation right. This is a call to the government as much as to all of us. In fact, it's crucial for us because poverty, you'll find in the report and in all studies, poverty exacerbates the destruction and the lives lost caused by disasters. Take an example, a disaster of the same level in a rich nation that kills 100 people, that same level of disaster kills 5,000 people in India or in a poor country. 100 to 5,000 for the same kind of disaster. Well, today we have a panel of the very best minds with real on-the-ground life experience to discuss ways in which India can save these hundreds of thousands of lives that we know are going to face and many be lost over the next 10 years because of different kinds of disasters. First, let me ask Dr. Parasuramman, who is the lead author, and Unni Krishnan, the co-author of this. So if you could make a quick introduction of the key things you're looking for in this report.
The report tries to examine the nature of human activities and how they have been impacting the ecosystem, and as a consequence of the changes in the ecosystem, how natural phenomena like floods have been, exacerbating the intensity of the disaster.
So the intervention of man in conjunction with the disaster, man makes it worse.
Yeah. The human activity in the ecosystem has made it far more difficult and amplified the impact on people and the other resources. I think that is an important point.
Not so much an act of God, it's an act of man that kills people.
It is an act of people, act of policies, and act of other processes.
I think that's a very key point which we must go into in detail here. Dr. Unni Krishnan, you have traveled around the world, you've visited the worst disasters at the worst times. What was your motivation in this report? You're a co-author.
Okay. I think it's becoming very clear that you may not be able to stop an earthquake. You may not be able to stop a tsunami, but you can very well stop a disaster from becoming a crisis. This is for a very strong leadership, primarily from the government side, and the government able to galvanize the collective capacity, which includes the civil society, the NGOs, the media, and others, together to make it work. So you can't stop a disaster, but you can very well stop a disaster from becoming a crisis. It's possible today.
Now, Lisa Grand is the UN resident coordinator in India and the UNDP resident representative in India, and you've had a wide range of experience. Can we learn from history that there are certain steps which may not require lots of funds Can we learn that there are steps we can take that can save millions of lives?
Dr. Roy, you're absolutely right about that. Colleagues may be aware that the United Nations tracks the impact and the scope of disasters around the world. And in the last 10 years, since we've been part of the decade that's associated with a framework called the HAGOGO framework, what we've seen is that out of the 193 countries in the world, 93 of them have had a major disaster. For each of those disasters, at a minimum, 100,000 people have been impacted. Now, what the studies also show, just as you said, Dr. Roy, is that the impact of disasters is hardest on the poor. All the evidence shows that. I like the statistic that you used when you said that if there's a disaster in America, if 100 people are affected, 5,000 people would be affected here. Let me share another statistic with you. We know that in poor developing countries that have a disaster, the impact on the GDP can range from 1.5 of GDP to a staggering 12% of GDP. I think one of the key points that we want to raise, one of the key messages, is that disaster risk reduction in a developing country is not a secondary priority. It's a top priority. It's not a secondary priority.
Right.
It has to be right at the top of the list of national priorities.
Right, right. And we have a long way to go in that still. We have to learn and be prepared. Preparedness is another area we must look at.
Dr. Roy, I hope you give me one other chance to celebrate India. The United Nations Development Program in May of this year produced an important report that looked at implementation of this HAGOGO framework that I'm referring to, and allow me just to share a little bit about what that framework is. In 2005, all the countries of the world came together. Now, the conference had been planned for months beforehand, but in terms of timing, ironically, the conference was actually held right after the terrible tsunami. So the impact around the world was clear. Countries knew that much more had to be done globally in order to address this question of disaster risk reduction. And what they did is something was special in the UN. They came together and they created not a complicated, long framework. They came together and they created a really smart, really sequenced, really intelligent framework for action called the GOGO. Now, what that framework said is there are 5 things that should happen in a country. Okay, so first of all, you have to make disaster risk reduction a priority. Second, you have to make sure that people know where the risks are, know where they are. Third, you have to help, this is a point you've been raising, Dr. Roy, you have to make sure that communities are resilient, that they can cope when the disaster comes. That's the third priority in the framework.
Just want to ask you on the second one. We'd like every community to know where are the potential disasters. Is there a huge dam nearby? Could you be near a coast and a tsunami?
And you know, this
earthquake-prone zones? They need to know that, right?
And this came up, Dr. Roy, very much in the Uttarakhand, the terrible tragedy that just happened, because many communities in Uttarakhand knew about the risk from landslides.
Right.
They knew about that.
Right.
They'd been briefed on it. They were aware of it. They knew some of the steps they needed to take. What wasn't as clear to many communities is what the risks were implied by a sudden cloudburst. So this goes to the point that you're raising, that you have to map the risks and really understand what the implications of them are.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Yes, your
the fourth
point,
priority is to address the underlying causes of the risk, and the fifth priority under HAGOGO for all countries is to be prepared to deal quickly and effectively with a disaster. Now, the report that the United Nations Development Program issued in May said that there are 5 countries around the world that have made big progress. 5 countries. Ready? Mozambique, Indonesia, Armenia, Ecuador, and India.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, Nand Kumar, you've been in the government for a long time and now you're heading this rather very important National Disaster Management Authority. How much of this is central and how much of it is local, that people in the local areas must react fast?
The disaster management architecture recognizes that communities are important, the district disaster management authorities are important. But let me also add 3 more points which I think are very important for what we're discussing. I think looking ahead, what should we do? One, I think we need to have a very clear policy of mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in all our development programs. Now, NREGA is one example. Some of the agriculture department schemes have those. The second is, I think we need to seriously expand our observational and forecasting capabilities. Use of space technology, use IMD, whatever else you want.
Doppler, we keep hearing about these.
We were supposed to have 55 Doppler weather radars by the end of the last plan. We are still at 20. So this is one of the issues. The last is, I think we need to seriously invest in capacity building from community level right up to the top. Even the chief engineer sitting, designing a dam.
I just want to know, Unni Krishnan, how big is the problem? How big is it? We've seen disasters before. Is it really getting worse, or is it not statistically proven yet? Or is it, we can expect big disasters coming in the next 10 years?
This is, the speculation is difficult, but we can learn from history what has happened. Trends show that the number of difficult disasters, the one which we find it difficult to cope, is going up. And there is a clear trend to that, and especially on floods, in our context cyclones, but in the context of the Caribbean region, the hurricanes, and Southeast Asia, typhoons. So floods, hurricanes, typhoons or cyclones, and drought triggering to food crisis. So these type of disasters, the incidence is increasing. If you look at the last 300 years, this 30-year period, the world has also seen more number of earthquakes.
Compared with the last
300
years before that.
Or so the number of recurring, repeated disasters are definitely going up. In fact, that's one reason why we humanitarian workers like me end up in more places now. There is more demand. Even in the context of India, such incidents are going up. There is more pressure on the government, as well as the UN and the universities and other aid agencies to respond. So
you're talking about more and more disasters, not only in India, around the world, more and more lives lost. This is what we have to look forward to, unfortunately. I think
just one correction there.
Yeah.
Lives are affected and lives are lost, but at the same time, the good thing that has happened is that we are able to save more lives. We are able to lift more people out.
Right.
Especially actions by local communities.